Hello, I'm Gwen Hill from Pine Ridge Baptist Church Sunday School Department Ladies Class, and we are still in our study of Exodus. We are in chapter 21 today. Moses has gone up to the top of Mt Sinai to talk with the Lord again. The Lord has in chapter 20 given the people of Israel the 10 Commandments. And he has done it with lightning and thunder and a dense fog. And they have heard his voice. Each one of them has heard his voice. And it has been a frightful, scary thing. And they have petitioned Moses to please talk with the Lord and then come tell them what he said. And that they didn't think that they could handle it, that it would surely kill them to continue to listen to God's voice. Sinful people just cannot tolerate being in a holy God's presence. And I can only imagine the conviction that they felt when the Lord sounded out those 10 commandments for them. All 2.5 million of those people at the base of Mount Sinai would have watched as Moses, that 80-year-old man, went up the mountain to be with God again. Let's start chapter 21. Just a little background. I get most of this from Matthew Henry that I'm reading to you right now. Through poverty, the Israelites sometimes sold themselves or their children. Magistrates sold some persons for their crimes, and creditors were in some cases allowed to sell their debtors who could not pay. We are looking at servitude. We are looking at slavery. You need to wipe away out of your mind the connotation that Americans usually have when we talk about slavery. We're thinking about slavery in our United States in the early 1800s. That is not the type of slavery that we're talking about here today. This is a different type. But this lesson is going to be on learning about the construct of moral laws, and to realize it is the basics for our own law system. Okay. Gonna have to move my camera just a little. Oh, okay. The law of God is for all people at all times, everywhere. God spoke it audibly, but the law of Moses was dictated to Moses and wrote down to him as for the Jew. This Mosaic law, in my imagination, I can see Moses up on top of Sinai and him and Moses having a discussion about making sure that Moses understood what God expected each time one of these laws was given. So let's start. God is going to be instructing the people on the principles of justice, and he's going to be teaching Moses how Moses is to teach the judges. Have you ever been in a lawyer's or a judge's office? They have these shelves and shelves of books. Those books are a lot of them are case studies. They are rules and regulations that the state and federal require them to know. And then if I come in with a problem or you come in with a problem, they can resource those to see how the judicial system handled that problem in the past. Well, this is a brand new nation. They've been a nation of slaves. They have been under the auspices of Egypt. They've not been able to make their own rules and regulations. They've not been able to enforce any rules and regulations that they had. They have been a people but not a nation. Moses, one of his big jobs while they're out here in this wasteland is to teach and then to instruct how God wants this people to become a nation. And one of the first things they have to have is laws. They have to have rules. They have to have ways to regulate people, or it would be complete chaos. And so God is instructing him on how he is to instruct the judges. Do you remember when Jethro came to visit and bring back Moses' 2 sons and his wife? And after observing Moses for a while, he said, Moses, you're not doing this right. All of these people are lined up as far as the eye can see to have an audience with you and have you judge any petty disputes that they may have. There's better ways of doing that. You pick leaders out of every tribe, men that are respected, men that have good common sense, men that are not subject to taking of bribes. And have the people tell their problems to them and let them handle it. If a problem gets so big that they don't know what to do, then they need to come to you. But here he's saying, let's teach them how to be righteous judges. So in verse 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 is the first ones we'll discuss. Number 1. Now these are the judgments which you shall set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, we're going to talk about the law of slavery first, of indenturement, of servitude. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free and pay nothing. If he comes in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master has given him a wife, and she has borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. The law and the bondservant is the next little grouping. But if the servant plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, and I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him before the judges. And he shall also bring him to the door, or to the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. Okay, he says, all right, Moses, the first subject we're going to tackle is servanthood or slavery. I am using currently the New International Version when I've been reading this to you. And we're considering and talking about the Jewish nation, the Jews. We're not going out and talking the other nationalities, just the Jews. If you buy a Hebrew servant, in other words, a fellow Hebrew, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free to pay nothing. They have a 1-to-6 ratio. This is one of the places that it shines. We have 6 days of work and 1 day of rest. We have different laws of 6s and 1s. Right this second, they've all left me except for that one. But here is an example. Oh, the ground. They work the ground for 6 years, and then the 7th year it lies fallow. Here's a new rule for the 6 and 1. If you if you take in a Jewish servant, he works for 6 years, and then he's free. Now, what would happen? There's 4 instances, 4 reasons why a Jew would consider going into servanthood, and the first one would be they're in extreme poverty. For whatever reason, this gentleman, this family cannot make it. They're going to starve to death. There is lots of problems. So he approaches someone who's better off financially than he is, and he says, I want to come and be your servant. I will hire myself out to you, and I will work to you. And maybe it was a year, maybe it was 2 years, but the very longest it could be would be for 6 years. And then the guy that was hiring him would give him a sum of money, and he in essence has bought him now. Okay? And then he begins to work with him. The servant, he can use that money to pay off creditors. He can use that money to buy food and shelter for his family. he can do anything he wants with it. The second reason, maybe it's a poor family and they're just barely making it, and they have a young daughter and they want to provide for that daughter the very best they can. Maybe they are approached, or they approach a landlord, a gentleman, and he can either want this young girl when she gets of age to become his own wife, or maybe he's making this deal with this father for his son, that when he gets of marriageable age, then they can join. The daddy would take a dowry. He would take the bride's price from him. That would help his family. It would also help that daughter to be affirmed in a family, that she would be set then for a husband. They would take her as when she was young and teach her the way that the family operated. She would be like a maidservant until she reached that age or that time when it was time for her to become a bride. That's another way. A third way would be in case of bankruptcy. If a man took a loan out and for whatever reason he couldn't pay it back. Maybe he took a loan to put his field put grain in his field, and maybe something happened to his crop that he couldn't then sell the crop and pay back his loan. So he had to go bankrupt. And it may very well be that the bankers said, we're going to put you in the service of so-and-so until your bankruptcy is paid. They could only do that for up to 6 years. And then the last one was if I was the thief and I had stolen and I was captured. If I was captured with the goods, then my time of endangerment wouldn't be that long. But if I was caught and I'd already sold the goods or did away with the goods or disposed of the goods in whatever way, and I had no money to pay back what the worth of what I stole, I would have to go into indentureship until that was repaid. So there's 4 different ways. And as we'll look at this is not rules for punishment so much as retribution. Our society runs on punishment. Theirs ran, God's wanted them to run on retribution. And it was swift. It was swift. So, they're telling here in verse 2 through 4, if a man came into servanthood working for the landowner or the master, and he came by himself, then when his debt was paid, or when that fixed 6th year was completed, whichever came first, he was free to go. If he came in, he and his wife, and the time was up, they were both free to go. But if he came in by himself, and the master introduced him to one of his other servants, and they became husband and wife, when the husband's 6 years were up, he could leave, but the wife couldn't leave with him. She still belonged to the master. And if they had any children, those children belonged to the master. Verse 5 and 6 is the law of the bondservant. If that servant did a assessment of the time that he was with the master, and he said, hey, this is a good thing. I have been kept comfortable here. I've got meaningful work to do here. The master is kind. My wife and children are here. I want to stay. He would approach the master. He would tell the master that when my 6 years are up, I do not want to leave. I want to stay and work with you. He would question him, the master would question him to see if he was sincere, if he knew what he was getting into. Then the two of them would go before the elders or the judge, or to go before the elders or the judge. And again, they would go through a period of questioning to make sure that anybody in the community that knew that this man had been working for the master for 6 years and should now be free, but he's still working. The master is not doing a good thing. He's breaking the law. They wanted something visible, something to be shown so that they would know the master was being honest. They also knew that now when they saw this man, he was a servant by choice. He had made the decision that instead of going free, he recognized and loved his master enough he wanted to stay. So they used an owl. My husband's got one that he punches holes in things. And it's a piece of metal with a very sharp tip. It's small. They would back up to the edge of the door sill and stretch the ear out, put the point of the awl at the ear, and then bam it through. Sounds horrible, doesn't it? But you know what? We've all had our ears pierced, and some people have got multiple piercings, so it's not that big a deal to us today, but back then it was. And then they would put a ring in his ear, and that anytime anybody saw that, they knew 2 or 3 things. They knew that he was a servant by choice. They would know that the master trusts him, because he wouldn't have said, he said, no, I would be glad to get rid of you when your time's up, if he wasn't a valuable member of his workforce. So they pierced his ear, put a ring in it, and that let everybody know. So now we go to the subject of marriage and slavery in regards to the girl we were talking about earlier in verse 7. And if a man sells his daughter to be a female slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do, if she does not please her master, who has betrothed her to himself, and then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to foreign people, since he has dealt deceitfully with her. And if he has betrothed her to his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. If he takes another wife, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, and her marriage rights. And if he does not do these 3 for her, then she shall go free without paying money. All right, get the first part of the sentence on verse 7. If a man sells his daughter. So he offers her, there's been some discussion about he is selling his daughter to either to become the master's wife or to become the master's son's wife. All right, he takes a bride price. Daddy takes the bride price, which will help her whole family now survive. She goes into the master's house as a servant until such time as the marriage is to take place. And if you can imagine, there's probably a social strata difference in these 2 people, and that training time would bring her up to an equal in his social strata. So she does that, and when it becomes time, then it's considered a betrothal. And if it's with the master, when he decides that it's time now for that betrothal to become a real marriage, and he's changed his mind, he doesn't want her to wife anymore, he has to give her family the opportunity to redeem her. He is not allowed to sell her to foreign agents, like Jacob's brothers sold him. Not Jacob, Joseph's. Joseph's brothers sold him. He's not allowed to do that. He's not allowed to do anything else. That's what he's supposed to do. Allow her to go home. When it says she's not to go out as male slaves do, that 6 and 1 does not apply to her, because in their day and in their time, in their cultural structure, women had very few rights. Very few. And there would have been no way for her to take care of herself in the way that the Lord would have wanted her taken care of. So he says, no, you're going to have to take care of her or release her back to her own father. So he can't. You can't just turn her loose. If he had paid the bride price for a future wife for his son, and then his son changed his mind that he didn't want her when he got of age, then they are to keep the girl in the family. Remember, betrothals are very much the same as marriages. They are to treat her, that female slave, like another daughter. She is to get the same food, the same clothing, the same rights. And by that, that's elevated to, she is to be treated like family, in that if there's any special things that the other ladies in the family get, she's not to be left out. She's to be taken care of. Much like Leah with Jacob. So they're taking care of the ladies here. God's been very specific to care for the ladies, and I appreciate the love that he's showing. 12, 13, and 14, we're talking about rules about murder and manslaughter. He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. However, if he did not lie in wait, but God delivered him into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place where he may flee. But if a man acts with premeditation against his neighbor to kill him by treachery, you shall take him from my altar that he should die. What he's saying in these, remember the 10 Commandments, it's not thou shalt not kill, it is thou shalt not murder. He says, he who strikes a man that he dies shall be put to death. You took a life is going to be required. He said, however, there are extenuating circumstances. If it was an accidental death, such as you and I got in our car today and we had an accident and someone died, and it was just wet roads, it was nobody breaking any laws or anything, just as an accidental death. He says that I'm going to fix a place for him to go so that he could stay in sanctuary until the judge could come and hear his story and see how the judge is going to rule. However, if a man acts with premeditation and murder is in his heart, murder is in his brain, and he kills somebody, going into sanctuary and grabbing hold of the altar is not going to save him. I want you to go right in there and get him, drag him right back out. Then we're going to move on into 15, 16, 17. We're still talking about capital offenses. We're still talking about murder. A little different. 15. And he who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. He who kidnaps a man and sells him, if he is found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. And he who curses his mother or his father shall surely be put to death. God has a culture that he wants to foster on these people. He has a way of respect in this culture that he wants to garner from these people. It starts in the home. The 5th commandment is thou shalt not disobey your mother and father. Thou shalt honor your mother and father. Okay, he's saying here, that's the basis, the ground level, the foundation of a lawful for society. And if you won't even obey your mother and your father, if you won't honor your mother and your father, what kind of citizen are you going to be? You're going to be a very negative citizen, and I want you out of here. So he says, any adult child that strikes their parent is not the kind of citizen I want in this Jewish nation. I want them out of here. And by out of here, he means permanently. And then he says someone who grabs someone, kidnaps them with the idea they're going to sell them into slavery. That's not allowed. You'll pay for that with your own life. And then he breaks it a little bit more. And he says, if you even curse your mother and your father, you'll surely be put to death. Rabbis and commentators have a little bit of construct on this. I don't know enough about it to argue with them, but they're saying if the person that's doing the curses takes the Lord's name in vain, it's like they're causing God to curse this mother and father, then that is a death sentence. because they can't speak for God. And it's not showing respect. And it's tearing up the foundation of this nation that God wants to bring about. Personal injury law and freedmen and slaves from 18 to 21. I'm going to read you 18 through 21. If men contend with one another, each other, and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die, but is confined to his bed, if he rises again and walks about outside with his staff, then he who struck him shall be acquitted. He shall only pay for the loss of his time, and shall provide for him to be thoroughly healed. And if a man beats his male or female servant with a rod, so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his property. 18. Two men are fighting, okay? And there's a lot of anger there. And one strikes the other, maybe with a stone that he picks up off the ground, or with his fist. He's just got enough strong enough fists work with him. He incapacitates the other fellow. He incapacitates him so bad he has to be cared for at home in bed. Well, what happens? These were agriculture people. These were people who had to run sheep, goats, cattle. Someone had to take them to pasture. Someone had to take care of them. They were farmers. They had vineyards. They would have vineyards, not here in the desert, but they would have vineyards. There's lots of things. These people didn't have health insurance. These people didn't have, like I said, so they looked at the person who did the hitting, the person that caused the injury, and said, you are going to take care of them and their family until he's back up and can take over for him himself. So you're going to work for him until he's able not only to get up in his house, but to get up and go outside and walk around a little bit, show that he's got his strength back. Then you are released. But until then, you're going to pay him retribution. You're going to take care of the problem that you caused. Anger does that. And then verse 20 and 21 is, for whatever reason, the master decides that he's going to beat, punish, reprimand either the male or the female servant, and he chooses to do it with a rod. The idea is, if he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. It doesn't say exactly how, but it would go before the judges, and the judges would decide. But remember, one of the punishments would be, he's already paid for that servant, right? And if that servant dies, then he's lost that investment. So that's one way. And in verse 21 it says, but if the servant remains alive a day or two, the thought being, if he survived the beating, master didn't mean to kill him. So, since that's his servant and he is his property, it goes from there. All right. This is where we stopped in Sunday school. We didn't get all the way through. I don't want to get ahead of them. So the next time we meet next week, we will finish chapter 21 and we will probably start in 22. Hope you have a good week.